Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 124. 124 months of podcasting, and we finally found a researcher, a doctor, a psychologist that is doing research into a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and that's critical thinking and cognitive energy. Really excited to have Dr. Dwyer on, as he spent his career researching how can we teach people to have critical thinking skills. Why are they so important? And what does it mean to us to be a critical thinker? Let me not jab on about it anymore. Let's get Dr. Dwyer on the show. We are back on the show with our guest, Chris Dwyer. Chris, it's really nice to have you with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
So maybe we could start off a little bit, since we're talking on the topic of critical thinking. Tell us a little bit about you and how you got into that area of research and what you've researched about it.
Yeah, well, when I started my PhD, it was focused on argument mapping, which is, I guess, a little bit like mind mapping, but maybe a little bit more obscure. It focuses primarily on structure of arguments rather than, just nodes and relationships among other abstract concepts. And we were looking at the effect of argument mapping on memory performance, and we had some interesting results with that. And, I was interested in cognition more generally anyway. So I said, let's go beyond memory, let's go beyond comprehension. And once you get into the higher order cognition realms, critical thinking seemed like, kind of a no-brainer to me to go into. And the more I read about it, the more, I studied it and did running experiments with it, I just kind of fell in love with it as an idea, as a concept, as something that, we should be promoting in everyday life. And, that's really where the passion kind of came from.
So when you talk about critical thinking, and this is usually a great place to start because everyone seems to define it a little bit differently. How do you define critical thinking?
So, yeah, it's a very good question in terms of a problem in the field is that a lot of experts, use different definitions for more or less the same thing. And it can be confusing for people out there who aren't really sure what it is. Now, to answer your question, I would define it as purposeful, self-regulatory, reflective judgment consisting of a number of skills and dispositions that, when used appropriately, enhances the chances of producing a valid conclusion to an argument or an accurate solution to a problem. Now, coming back to what I was saying about dissent among experts and researchers in the field is they use different obscure abstract words to more or less relay the same ideas, but the reality of it is most of them agree that critical thinking is a number of core skills and a number of core dispositions. Now, I kind of take that one step further because I had a very interesting conversation years ago with a colleague who said to me, if you get really good at critical thinking over time, it becomes almost automatic then. It becomes gut level if, you're dealing with it in terms of expertise. And that's very true. You do get good at it, but then that kind of defeats the whole purpose of critical thinking because going with your gut and having automatic thinking is the complete antithesis of critical thinking.
So if you get good at it, you're actually defeating the purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where this aspect of reflective judgment, and that's why I focus on that purposeful, self-regulated, reflective judgment. That's the important aspect because reflective judgment is kind of about taking a step back, and it doesn't matter how much you know or how smart you are or how much you think you know or how smart you think you are. It requires you to take a little bit more time to be cautious, to accept that, there's a certain level of uncertainty with everything in life and that there is only a finite amount of knowledge that we can get about any particular topic and, to make a decision in light of these limitations. So it requires you to kind of take that step back. Now, there was a great book a few years back by Daniel Kahneman. It was called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he identifies as a number of cognitive psychologists in the field. They refer to these two systems of thinking, system 1 and system 2. So for anyone familiar with those kind of concepts, when I talk about reflective judgment, I'm talking about system 2 thinking and the overriding of intuitive judgment, which is, system 1. So in a simple way, I guess you could call critical thinking a matter of a few core skills, a few core dispositions, and this idea of reflective judgment / system 2 thinking.
So how do you train people on that? I mean, it seems like this is a new way of thinking through a problem. So how do you actually train people to do this?
Yeah, so that's actually, one of my fields of interest. I'm really interested in how we get people better at this. And the answer is we don't know yet. So many different environments in which you can do it. And every context is a bit different. So I've taught multiple different kind of groups, I guess, if you want to call them that, critical thinking over an extended period of time. And, I'm interested in seeing how they improve and the like. So if you take a typical undergraduate course in critical thinking, you'll see improvements over time, significantly through a dedicated domain general critical thinking course. I've also done the same thing with more mature students, so like adult learning courses. So one study we recently did, we had a cohort of mature students who, with an average age of roughly 44, 45 years old. It was quite interesting because we compared their performance with, we'll say, more traditional undergraduate courses and found that the older the students were, they were actually worse at critical thinking. But what makes it interesting is that even though that they were significantly worse at the beginning, at baseline, they actually improved much more than traditional students would have over time, over the course of the semester. So, it is really interesting to kind of tease out all the different things that influence how critical thinking skills are taught. But it is very contextual. It's dictated quite a bit by who's in the group, how it's presented, all those kind of minor details.
So in the universities, these courses you just mentioned, what do they do to teach students how to apply critical thinking skills?
Yeah, you see, that's another problem. We don't know. Everyone seems to be doing it differently. So in the past, I've done it in a very traditional way in the classroom for a semester long. I've also done it online where students would just, engage through video lectures and online activities and do that for a semester. So there's different ways of doing it, but it really comes back to this idea of how we conceptualize critical thinking. And there was a great study about 10 years ago by Lloyd and Bear. I think that's who was doing it. But they interviewed a large body of educators in third level education and asked them about what they do. How do they teach critical thinking? What do they teach? And, very, very different concepts. But one of the main things that I found really interesting was that when they were asked, what is critical thinking, when they were put on the spot about, what are the learning outcomes that they're really interested in, a lot of them actually kind of balked at the idea. They're like, actually, you've put me on the spot. You've asked me what critical thinking is. And you know what? I'm not even sure if I know now, and that kind of tells me, like, as a researcher, it says, if we're not sure what critical thinking is, how can we be sure what we're teaching or trying to teach is actually critical thinking? So when you see all these recommendations for, we need to teach more critical thinking, our college graduates are coming out of their undergraduate degrees and they can't think critically, we implicitly put the blame on them that they're not working hard enough. But, I think the educators have to look at themselves as well and make sure that they're doing all that they can to ensure that they're transferring this knowledge as best they are. And that might require them to do a little bit more research on critical thinking themselves. Don't get me wrong. That's not to say that all educators or every educator out there who's interested in critical thinking is doing it wrong. That's not the case. But it is something that every educator who is interested in critical thinking, they really need to consider before they go into the classroom and tease out exactly what it is that they want their students to be able to do appropriately.
So if you were to, let's give them an exercise, something. What kind of exercises can a person do to see if they even, I don't know the right phrase to use, but if they're even decent at critical thinking, or if they have a capacity now to do that? Is there an exercise that helps people see like where they're at with it?
Yeah, there's a number of them. So like when we think about critical thinking, we have to first identify where we want it applied. So there are generally 5, I guess, mass categories of where we can apply it in everyday life. So I'd say the most common one would be argument analysis, or just plain old argumentation, as I would say, because the way I look at it, as I said earlier, that they're core skills requisite for critical thinking and their analysis, evaluation, and inference. So, to say argument analysis is an application in its whole right wouldn't be entirely accurate. So we would say more so argumentation. But argumentation would be one of the more widespread, better known examples. Hypothesis testing as well, problem solving, judging likelihoods and certainties. So, for example, in terms of judging likelihoods and uncertainties, I have an example of lottery. Imagine that you've got a lottery and you want to figure out what your odds are of winning. And say there's 45 numbers possible and you have to pick 6 of them. are you more likely to win with random numbers, or are you more likely to win with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? Then I would ask them to try and figure out what are the odds of winning with each set. So, you might ask yourself questions about that. But after a while, you should realize that they're exactly the same, that this concept of randomness is, we're just arbitrarily picking out numbers at random, but it's the same odds as picking out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And by rights, when people start doing the maths behind it, they will see that it's one and the same, and that what the general population might perceive of as randomness, 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42, that's the same odds of coming up as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I find that people very, very often confuse that.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of like in my community, in our industry, probably the two out of the list that you mentioned, arguments, because there seems to be, I don't know how it is in your field, but in our field, there seems to be a lot of drama. I mean, the people in my community love drama for the sake of drama, it seems. And then second is problem solving because of what we do for a living, whether we're in the security field writing code for a program, or we're trying to bypass someone's security infrastructure to help them, secure it even more. There's a lot of problem solving that has to occur. So in argument analysis, or in the argument side of the critical thinking, how can that skill be used to reduce the drama or to help? And not necessarily, I don't want to use the phrase like win an argument, because that seems to be everybody's goal. But can critical thinking, maybe even step back, maybe the question is, can critical thinking be used to reduce arguments in general?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it comes down to the wording as well. Arguments are a good thing. Arguments are how we make decisions, whether or not it's with another person or even with ourselves. Say, for example, anytime you read a piece of dialogue, a transcript, or anything, imagine every conversation you've ever had, there's an actual transcript of. If you look at it and you read through, anytime you see the words like but, because, however, yet, therefore, that's an argument. And those words are very helpful, because they show us the logical structure of where we're going with it. So the reality of it is, I say arguments are a good thing, and we need arguments on a daily basis because they allow us to solve problems. But I think what you did there was, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of this word drama. And when we think of the concept of arguing, argumentation, what have you, we think of a heated debate. We think of two people going at it. But the fact is that anytime we engage in a dialogue like that, the purpose of it is to learn something new. There's the concept of winning, as you were saying. Yeah, people argue to be right, but that's the wrong reason to argue. And if that's the only reason why you're entering into an argument, then, critical thinking has waved bye-bye a long time ago, kind of thing. You want to get into it to either teach someone something or to learn something new yourself. So if you find that you're constantly trying to teach other people and you're not willing to change your mind on a certain topic, that's not critical thinking.
Now, that's an interesting point. If I can just stop you there for a second, just because, so maybe it's even the idea of the goal of a debate or an argument. If the goal is to win, like you say, critical thinking's out the window already. But if your goal is just to understand the other person's side, so you come at it with maybe during this discussion, my thoughts will be changed, because maybe they'll bring up points that are new to me and novel to me and help me think in a different way. And that kind of thinking actually makes an argument beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of dichotomies in critical thinking, right? So there's this idea of critical thinking is all about skepticism. Well, that is true. You need to be skeptical of points that people are putting forward. You need to assess them in terms of credibility and relevance and all these other things. But at the same time, you need to be open-minded, because we're coming into every discussion we ever have, every piece of information we engage, everything we look at, we're coming from a biased perspective. And so we have to remove that bias if we're actually to come up with a properly, critically thought out interpretation of that. So in that regard, you have to be open-minded. You have to be open to new ideas, even if they're contrary to what you held as true or believed, half your life or whatever it may be. And that's really where this concept of, drama, and drama is very, very interesting here, because drama is an emotional thing. When we're talking about a debate or a discussion we have and there's a lot of drama, it's only drama because of the emotion that we've put in. People are passionate about their thoughts, and that's fine, that's fantastic. By rights, we should only critically think about topics we care about. But because we care so much about them, we have to, it's paramount that we acknowledge our own bias in it and try to remove that as best we can. So if we aim to remove the bias and we aim to remove the emotion from the topic, it's only then really that we can start thinking critically about it.
If I'm hearing you right, when we enter any kind of debate or argument, whether it's in person, it's online, it's through email, the first onus is on us. It's on us and how we approach it. Even if the person's irate, even if the person is they're out to win, they're out to humiliate us or whatever, we got to go into it with this thought of, teach me your side, because I want to learn. Maybe you're right, and I need to learn this.
Absolutely, yeah. Critical thinking as a term, as a phrase, it's relatively new in the grand scheme of things. Less than 100 years old, but we see examples of it throughout the history of philosophy. Socrates was a great example for doing this. The Socratic method, constantly asking why. And if you let people go on about what they believe and why they believe it, if you let them go long enough, if what they're saying is misinformed or inaccurate, the inaccuracy will make itself clear. And then, we can kind of say, well, you're wrong here. This is where you're wrong. And that's where your logic's wrong. And, nothing against you or anything, but the proposition you're making, the claim you're making is inaccurate. So quite often we don't have to do very much of it.
How do you suggest handling that, though? Like if you go into that situation and the person that you are debating with or having this discussion with is not applying critical thinking. So they're irate. They don't want to hear what you just said. You listen to both sides, you can see their logic, but you see there's a flaw. Man, sometimes pointing that out to people is just going to create more debate, more problems, So how do you suggest handling those kinds of situations?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I have not perfected this yet myself. It is difficult. It requires a lot of patience. But, you have to constantly remind yourself of what's the goal of the conversation. If you've realized after a while that this person is not open-minded, if this person is not willing to change their mind and they're not willing to debate you in an objective way, then you have to say to yourself, why am I still involved in this debate? Why am I still engaging this person? That's when you say, right, I'm out, mic drop kind of thing.
So there is a time, even when using critical thinking, where it's just good to step back and go.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the thing is, if someone's just making an argument based on pure emotion, whether it's anger or passion or whatever, chances are you're not going to really get anything out of them that's really evidence-based, other than, personal experience, anecdotal evidence, anything like that. So you're not learning anything from them. You're not getting anything worthwhile from them. And so if you're not learning and they're not willing to learn, it's a Mexican standoff kind of thing. There's no winner. There's no point. Why are you doing this? So, it's knowing when to just say, right, enough is enough. And it's important to do that as well, because like I said, you should only be thinking critically about things you care about. Once you're not going to achieve your goal, pull out, because you're wasting valuable cognitive energy. And making decisions is tiring. Thinking critically is very tiring. And you can't do it all day long. It's really tough. So say, for instance, I don't think critically about the clothes I wear when I get up in the morning. I don't think critically about the coffee I order when I go to the shop. My gut tells me what to do. And I let my gut tell me, because it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. If I have a meeting, okay, I'll put on a dress shirt and, maybe a tie. But if I'm just sitting at the desk all day doing research, I'm going in jeans and a sweater, It's not a really tough one for me. And whether or not I get a latte or a cappuccino or a regular, it doesn't matter. It's all coffee.
So you don't need to walk through life critically thinking about every little tiny decision.
Yeah, and I'm bad enough as it is. I get really stressed about decision making. So if I started worrying about all these things, I'd be falling asleep by the time 11 o'clock in the morning comes. You just wouldn't be able for it. And that's another reason why you hear all this advice like never go food shopping in the evening after work, because it's not only because you're hungry and you're going to buy a lot of stuff that you don't need, but it's also you're making poorer decisions because all your good decisions have been made throughout the working day. And you don't have the cognitive energy left. And that's something we call decision fatigue. The amount, you have a finite amount of, decisions that can be made accurately during the day. And as the day goes on, that fatigue sets in and you start making less accurate decisions as the day goes on.
Let's take a quick break from the show to talk about what's going on in the world of social engineering, as well as some other really exciting things that are coming up. I'm sure you've heard, because we've been blasting it all over the world, February, which is right around the corner. I mean, really, it's just around the corner. So we're ending 2019, which I can't believe that sentence just came out of my mouth, entering 2020, and February 20th, 21st, and 22nd. We have the very first Human Hacking Conference in Orlando. Beautiful weather. It's going to be awesome. So come on down to that. You can check that out at the site sevillage.org if you want to get registered and come on down to that event. Shortly after that, in March of 2020, March 16th, we're kicking off our Advanced Practical SE course, also in Orlando. You can sign up for that. There's still seats left. I think we're about 35 or 40% full on that, so you still have time to get registered for that class. The next APSE class is in Bristol, UK. That's in June. Beautiful time of year to be in the UK and Bristol. A wonderful little city. Great for SE engagements. That's June 1 through 5 over in Bristol, and I think we're about 50 or 60% full for that class. So you're definitely going to want to get into that one if you're interested. We're going to be putting an OSINT class on the website, a public OSINT class. We're just finalizing the details for that, and then we'll get that up there for you. And I'm sure there's some other exciting things coming. You'll be really, really excited to hear as we enter into the new year. We just finalized our first ever ILF rock and roll memorabilia auction. Just want to take a minute to thank Neil Fallon. This was his idea. He organized it, put it all together. Just an amazing guy. And the stuff that we had, wow. When we tabulate it all in the next podcast, I'll give you some stats on how the auction went. But it's just mind-blowing. Anyhow, that's about it for now. So why don't we get back to the show? So that's an interesting little tidbit. So this cognitive energy, how do you refresh that? How do you replenish that if you're feeling fatigued and then you have, like, let's say you can't avoid it. You have a meeting and it's 5 p.m. because they're on the West Coast and you're on the East Coast and you've already worked the whole day and you now need to make sure you can have some energy to critically think. How do you go about replenishing that cognitive energy?
Yeah. Here's that critical thinking part I was telling you about, uncertainties and stuff, right? It's very fair to say, I don't know. And in this case, I don't know. If it was me, I would avoid a meeting like that if I could, or put the onus on them to meet me later in the evening or something like that, maybe, or just take it easy all day long. But the best of my knowledge is sleep. A good night's sleep will help you. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know. If I knew personally, if I knew I had an important meeting or a telephone conversation or something like that, I'd try and take it pretty easy for the early parts of the day. I wouldn't do anything too taxing.
So that's an interesting thought. So it's really, again, that's planning ahead. So you're saying, hey, at 5 p.m. I have a meeting. I don't want to be going 100 miles an hour up until 4:58. So I'm going to take some breaks during the day so I have some of that cognitive energy left for that evening meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's how I would go about it. But that's not a guarantee either, because even the being awake requires these kind of almost implicit decisions. Again, like going in, making the decision that you want more coffee, making the decision that you need to get up and go to the toilet. All these little things, take a little bit of energy from us, during the day. So it's an interesting field.
It is. So have you done any research into how to increase your cognitive energy capacity?
No, I haven't. I've done a lot of reading, though, in the area. It's all around what they call decision fatigue. Roy Baumeister, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he does quite a bit of research in that field. And yeah, I find it very interesting. So like when people ask me, they're like, if I need to think critically, when should I do it? Or people would say to me, oh, I'm a real night owl, and that's when I get my best work done. I'd be very skeptical of that, because I think to myself, well, when are you most rested? When are you most likely to make a good decision? And it's not necessarily being in at nighttime or in the morning. Like, I know different people have different schedules, and I used to work with a guy who wouldn't come into work until maybe 2 in the afternoon, and he'd stay till about 4 in the morning. And that was fine. It wasn't a night day kind of thing. It was just, when was he most rested? When did he have enough energy to make the important decisions? And that was good for him, you know?
To me, it's a very interesting concept that there's no way to replenish it except for a good night's sleep. And we know we have a limited amount, kind of like a battery. And really then lends to the idea that we need to plan our activities throughout the day much better, which I'm like personally applying this as we're talking and thinking, I am definitely not successful at doing this. It will be back-to-back meetings and conversations that involve serious decisions from multiple different organizations that I work with. And then, at the end of the day is when all of a sudden we're going to be sitting as a family and we're going to make some family decisions, which are relatively important. And that's not a great time to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about planning, and you're dead right, and it is about planning and organization, and that's a lot to do with the kind of dispositional factor of critical thinking. Yeah, you have to be inclined to be an organized person. You have to be inclined to be a planner, and kind of those kind of self-management, self-maintenance kind of dispositions are very important here. But it's like typical. It's like typical tiredness. So, like, you might say to someone who works construction, after a day's work, they come home and they're tired. Well, why are they tired? Well, I've been working all day. I've been doing this, I've been doing that, really hard work. And you talk to someone else, and they sit at a desk all day, and you're like, well, why are you tired after? Well, okay, I sit at a desk all day, but I'm required to think. I'm required to be on the ball all day in terms of being aware of what's going on, planning around certain thinking and plans and this and that. Well, it's just a different type of tiredness, but it's still the kind of same feeling, isn't it? We have physical muscles, but we have brain muscles as well, and both get tired. And that's where this kind of decision fatigue comes in. If you're a construction worker, and I asked you to run 6 or 7 miles after work, you wouldn't be inclined to do it. But, the same might be said for someone who's been sitting at the desk all day thinking about, I could do that. No, tired is tired.
And that's interesting. Now, does physical labor drain your cognitive energy?
Ooh, that is an interesting question. I don't know. Again, from being in the field of critical thinking, I refuse to speculate when I don't know. And this is one of those times. I don't know.
And you know what? That is a really wonderful quality.
Yeah, well, you don't see it very often.
It's a really wonderful way to teach, in my opinion. I've loved that in this conversation so far. It's one of my methods when I teach a 5-day class multiple times a year, and it's been my rule for the last decade. If I don't know something, I will tell you, and then I will see if I can find the answer and come back to you. But, there may be times where I just have no clue about what you're asking. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. You can't know everything.
Exactly. And that was one of those things that Socrates, it's attributed to him, as he said, I don't know, and that's fine, something to that effect. And that's part of where the Socratic method came from initially, in that it's fine to not know. And like, if you think about it in terms of human beings and their desires, we learn from the research by Kahneman, and he cites quite a bit of it. Human beings love to be right. But what's an even greater feeling is they love to be right, but they hate to be wrong even more so. So I say, let's engage that. Let's embrace that. I wouldn't like to be, out in public and say something that I have absolutely no idea about. I'll tell you if I'm speculating, but that clarity is important, because if someone finds out that's nonsense or you've made it up or what have you, that's a lot more embarrassing than saying, I don't know.
And that's true. But I want to come back to something you said. Why is it that we as humans hate being wrong so much?
Yeah, like as Kahneman would have said in Thinking Fast and Slow, it's about risk aversion. We want to avoid the things that are detrimental to us. The mechanics behind it, again, I don't know, but that's how it is.
No, but that's a great answer. We don't enjoy things that we're not good at. We don't enjoy things that we feel bring us too much risk, and not knowing in front of a group of your peers has a high risk factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that could be enough of a fear that we decide to make something up as opposed to just saying the 3 magic words, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, the thing is, the more you do that, the more people will trust what you do say. it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. If he keeps crying wolf, no one will listen to him anymore. It also kind of shows that you are doing the critical thinking. That if you're the type of person who wants to seek the truth, if you're skeptical about the right things and you're open-minded about the right things as well, that goes two ways. You want the truth from other people, and so you should equally give them the truth as opposed to just spouting nonsense, really.
It's a fascinating topic, really. I can understand why you chose to make this your area of research. It seems like getting to that end where you finally, and maybe you will in your research, like figure out how do we replenish cognitive energy midday when you're stressed and tired? How do we train effective critical thinking? Can you imagine if we can train the next generation of young people coming up from elementary school how to engage in critical thinking activities and skills from youth upward? Like how that would affect society as a whole? That would be amazing, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think when I teach social psychology, I'll explain all the various phenomena and effects and all that. But I always tell them that when in doubt, and they don't know the answer, just say it depends, and that'll be accurate because everything that happens there depends on something else. Environmental factors, other people there, the mood you're in, all of this kind of stuff, and that applies to critical thinking. It all depends. So some people might be listening and say, you know what? I do actually do better work in the evening. And, I've done cognitive assessments and it actually shows that I do better in the evening. And that may be the case. Again, it depends. And there's all these other external factors there that influence that. But when it comes down to it, I think if we're looking at truly trying to develop critical thinking in children and younger students, I think the first place that we need to go with is making people aware that this is important, making them want to think critically, making them see the value in it. Because the problem is, what I found is you can teach a lot of people to think critically and they'll know it, they'll know the skills, they'll know the mechanics behind it. They are fully able to do it. But why don't they do it? Well, they're not disposed to do it, maybe in a global sense or maybe in specific situations. So if there was a topic that really someone was really, really passionate about, they might critically think about everything. But if, it's an emotion-based feeling that they're going with, quite often they'll go with that emotion, no matter how good of a critical thinking thinker they are. So that's why we really need to send home this idea about being willing, being motivated to apply critical thinking, because it's not enough to teach people the skills of it. It's to teach them to value it. And I think that's the number one barrier that we really have at the current moment in critical thinking. Is it's easy to learn. It's like anything else. You practice these skills and you learn how to do it. But it's about wanting to do it and wanting to be objective and wanting to be accurate,
Yeah, that's wonderful. I just looked up at the clock and seeing, wow, I told you we would go 30, 35 minutes and I'm going on 40 because this has been such a fascinating conversation. I think I could talk about this for quite a while. I love this aspect. It's something in our classes that we've talked about a lot. Now, I'm not a researcher. We haven't researched it, but we talk about the importance of critical thinking in this job, in this field, and in just daily communications. In our field, every day we deal with communicating with people on very serious matters. And we'll talk about how important it is that critical thinking is used in that. So I really will be following your research and hope to see some great things coming out from the things that you're working on. People will probably be asking, how can they follow your research? How can they know more about you? So what's a way that people can get a hold of you or find out what you're working on or what you're releasing?
Yeah, well, I have a blog. I post something new roughly once every 3 weeks, and that's on Psychology Today. And the blog is called Thoughts on Thinking. It's a nice one. It's kind of topical. It's a more lay kind of transfer of knowledge, I guess, and more accessible. But, if there's something interesting in the news, we talk about it. If there's something, that just comes up to me that kind of hits me about the nature of critical thinking, we'll talk about that as well. So it's a nice one. I'm on Twitter as well. My handle is @CogitoErgoDwyer. So for anyone who knows Rene Descartes, as opposed to Cogito Ergo Sum, it is Cogito Ergo Dwyer. It's pretty lame, I know, but it's all I could think of at the time when I was doing it.
That's okay. I'm going to have to find that to spell it.
Yeah, they didn't have @Chris Dwyer available, so that's what I went with. Yeah, my book as well, Critical Thinking, Conceptual Perspectives and Practical Guidelines. And that was published by Cambridge University Press.
Excellent. So besides your book, which obviously we're going to put in the show notes, I'm sure that will be some heavy interest in that based on what I know from our community that listens to this podcast. We always ask our guests to recommend a book maybe that they've read, that they've liked, something that they think could help people in maybe the very way it helped you. So besides your book on critical thinking, do you have another book recommendation that you would give?
I mentioned it before, but I think Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is just one of those great texts. Just such a far, wide-ranging amount of effects on thinking that, we encounter in everyday life, all these little things, how they affect us and the way we think. I think it's just a brilliant read for anyone who hasn't yet encountered it. And likewise, I think it's a book that, you could read one day, put it down, and then, 10 years later, pick it up again and you'll find something new in it. I think it's a fantastic book. And there's another one as well, Thought and Knowledge by Diane Halpern, which is the former president of the APA and a widely known psychologist. That was another great read as well. It really focuses on the application of critical thinking. And I think that's something that in the terms of research and academia, I think we kind of skip over that bit to a certain extent in that, a lot of the research in the academic books are very concerned with defining what critical thinking is and the skills necessary to do it. And maybe less so to the dispositions as well, but applying those skills and applying those dispositions in real world scenarios, I think is just as important, because you need to be able to identify the opportunities to actually use your critical thinking. It's like any student, they're sitting there in class one day and say to themselves, why am I ever going to need Pythagoras and his theorem? And you're, just kind of going through the motions, Yeah, I think Halpern's book is great because it actually shows you this is how you will use it in a real world cases, It's pretty cool.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Those are 3 great recommendations. I'm going to put all of them in the show notes with links for people to check out those books. And I really appreciate you recommending them. And I truly appreciate you coming on the show today and spending so much time with us. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So to be honest with you, I think it's brilliant. Like this is one of the things I like about critical thinking. I think any opportunity I can get to talk about it, and if 1 or 2 people are like, wow, I really enjoyed that, I think I'll make extra efforts in my life to kind of go about what was recommended. I think that's super, and that's what we need. We're never going to change the minds of everyone, and you kind of sit there. I sit there and I think, what's wrong with with the way people think, and why are they jumping to such conclusions, and why do people fall for such nonsense? Whether it's online or in the news or something like that, why are people falling for it? And you know what? There's nothing we can do about it. We can try our best, but we're not going to change the minds of everyone. We're not going to get everyone to do it. But if you can get, a handful of people each time, that's great.
I'm with you. Again, I'm sure there'll be more than 1 or 2 that enjoy this, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. I look forward to maybe chatting again in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. I look forward to it, Chris.
Another wonderful episode. I was really excited to have Dr. Dwyer on to talk about critical thinking, talk about cognitive energy, and what a fascinating conversation. I mean, literally, I think we were like 40-something minutes, and I told him we'd be at 30, and none of us mattered. None of us minded because it was a really, really great conversation. You can continue to follow the work that he has in the show notes. We'll have all the links there. And if you want to know more about us, we're at social-engineer.org, social-engineer.com, SE Village for anything with the conference. And you can check out Innocent Lives at innocentlivesfoundation.org. Follow me on Twitter at Human Hacker, SOC Engineer Inc., SE Village, or Innocent.org. I guess that's about it. You can find all those on the websites too. And I look forward to seeing what topic we get to discuss next month. Till then, see you.